All right, welcome everybody. This is the Make It Real Information Protection for GDPR. My name is David Bjorman-Burr, and I'm a security architect with Microsoft. What I like to do at these Make It Real sessions is going to bring a particular piece of technology to life using a customer example in a real-world sort of way. So we only have 20 minutes. There's a ton of stuff to talk about regarding GDPR. We'll have it in the booth. So we're just going to kind of touch on a few things here in this session. All right, but before we get technical, I just want to go over some things we already have in market that can help with GDPR, whether you're a customer trying to sort out your own compliance or whether you're a partner trying to help your customers. Kind of the first step for any of this is really laying the foundation. We do have a GDPR foundational training course that folks can download, consume themselves, that basically explain a lot of the terminology and a lot of the considerations regarding the GDPR. So this is super helpful if you're working with stakeholders in the organization or a customer that doesn't already understand the GDPR, so that you can start working and collaborating together. Generally, the second step is for an organization to understand the gaps. We do offer a GDPR detailed assessment. You can download this from our website. We have it both as the assessment as a standalone piece as well as a complete kit. The kit is designed for partners to use if they're offering the assessment as a service. It includes other collateral such as a delivery guide and presentations that are customer facing. The detailed assessment is not necessarily a technical assessment. This is a piece of work that helps customers understand and prioritize what they need to work on for GDPR compliance. Typically, the third step often involves discovering where personal data resides. We often find that customers are not acutely aware of all the places they may have personal data stored. They may have spent years collecting data that they're concerned about. So oftentimes the third step involves some sort of scan of the environment, some sort of search for personal data so they can figure out what to do. We do offer a GDPR data discovery toolkit that helps, again, guide a partner or customer through this process. And sort of fast forwarding a little bit, we do have Compliance Manager, which allows customers to manage their compliance for GDPR or other frameworks in one spot. So we currently support GDPR, NIST 853, ISO, and HIPAA for Office 365. We currently support ISO for Azure. GDPR guidance is coming. And if you're not familiar with Compliance Manager, I recommend you go take a look. We're demoing it in the booth back there. We can tell you all about it in our booth. So if you look at the general overall process an organization goes through to become compliant, it usually starts with awareness. The first thing they need to understand is, what is the GDPR? How does it affect me? What do I need to do? And what do I already have in place that might help? Second step is often involves some sort of discovery exercise. Most customers need to identify which personal data they have and where it resides. They need to understand if they have a problem, and they usually want to quantify how big that problem might be. The next step, once they have a fairly good understanding of their personal data landscape, is they need to start putting stuff in place to manage this, govern how the personal data is used and accessed. They'll often ask questions like, how do I manage my data? How do I stay in control? How do I respond to specific requests, such as an audit or a subject access request? We're often always involved with protecting data. Clearly, we need to protect against data breach. We need to defend against data breach and understand when a data breach happens so we can react quickly. It's a key step. And I believe data breach is probably the most important, or the first step folks need to look at for GDPR. But usually the second step, or second most important thing, involves record keeping. Keeping required documentation so that if a subject authority or supervisory authority asks how an organization is complying with a particular piece of the legislation, that they actually have some way to respond to that, where they can show what has been done and what they're doing going forward. So in this short little session, we're going to talk about a couple of these pieces and a couple of things we have in place today that can help. We do have the detailed assessment. This has been picked up by IAPP and published broadly on their site. We also have the assessment available as a kit, as I mentioned before, along with the GDPR foundational training. We just shipped version 3 of the assessment. This thing's picked up close to 40,000 downloads by now, so it's being used broadly by our customers. And on the discovery side, we also offer the data discovery toolkit that I mentioned previously. So in our little Keep It Real session, we're going to talk about these 3 areas: discover, manage, and protect. And we'll start with discover. So remember, discover is really about identifying personal data and where it resides. This kind of helps answer the question, do I have a problem and how big is it? So a typical discovery assessment oftentimes just begins with basic identity and assessment of the data repositories. So this is often a process by which we go and figure out where is the data stored, who owns it, do we have access to it, do we understand what's there? This is often where we recommend planning for classification. I'll get into that in a little bit here before we start to implement anything. We'll typically select the right solution, and what I mean by select solution is select the right solution for discovery. The discovery options will change if a customer intends to keep everything they have on premises. They may already have plans to migrate to the cloud. So discovery may inform their migration, might help them prioritize what to migrate versus what they don't want to migrate. If they're going to stay on premises for the foreseeable future, they're going to make sure they need to select a solution that's going to work on premises, not just in the cloud, for example. There'll often be some implementation steps. We'll want to test, build, and configure whatever it is we're using for discovery. Make sure it's accurate. And then oftentimes the discovery begins. We'll often classify our data. At Microsoft, we recommend classification during the discovery components, just so that the organization doesn't have to go scan everything again to implement some basic data governance. So when we talk about data classification, for folks that aren't already doing this, a lot of times I get questions on where to start. People ask me, David, what should my labels look like? What technology should I use? And I usually ask folks to step back a little bit, and in many cases, data classification should involve an organization's legal department in the US, or if we're outside of the US, a privacy and compliance expert, as this will help them understand how the GDPR applies to them. There's no universal rules that defines personal data. It's often advantageous to have some professional legal advice in this process to help establish some legal requirements for the process of personal data. Second, IT is almost always involved. They'll help evaluate required technology. They understand what the technical capabilities are within a particular platform, and they'll help establish the IT requirements. And the glue that holds us all together really is the business. The business will help inform whether the stuff that IT and legal came up with is actually workable. If the people in the business are able to use this stuff, if it makes sense, they'll help test and validate it. And we bring these 3 together. We'll bring them down to one thing. This is where what we call the taxonomy. The taxonomy is a collection of policies that the organization has decided to implement. The labels, if they're using our label technology such as Azure Information Protection or Office 365. The conditions for which those labels apply. Any potential data or sensitive data types that might be in use. Real common one is identifying credit card numbers and applying some kind of policy to that so we can identify it and potentially protect it with encryption or something else. So to keep it real, I'm going to introduce you to Contoso. Contoso is a fictitious company. I like to use it as an example to kind of weave through some of these things to sort of make it make sense. So Contoso is a clothing manufacturer in the European Union. They have textile mills outside of the EU that they transact with, that they own. Contoso conducts businesses with customers directly. And they also have a channel program where their partners also transact on their behalf. Conveniently, every Contoso customer, whether it's partner-led or direct, has a Contoso customer number attached. So Contoso is highly confident that everywhere there is personal data, there is also a Contoso customer number. They're very well organized in this regard, and therefore they can identify all personal data in their environment by the presence of a Contoso customer number. So Contoso's discovery engagement looked like this. When they went through the identify and assess phase, they found that they have terabytes of data stored on premises today. The sensitivity and ownership of this data is not well understood. Contoso determined through their legal, business, and IT groups that there's really only two types of sensitive data they need to address right now. One is personal data, subject to the GDPR, and the other is financial data, which is pretty typical of most organizations. The solution they selected is they want to scan and classify the data on premises first. They intend to prioritize the migration of confidential personal data Office 365. Their reasons for doing this is they don't want to have to build subject access request capabilities and search capabilities on premises. It's very difficult and costly for them, so they're going to move the personal data Office 365, take advantage of the capabilities there. The finance data, unfortunately, will remain in place for now. They're not able to move it. There's legacy application requirements that require it to remain in place. So they decided they're going to implement Azure Information Protection for the classification process and the labels that are going to go on the documents. And they're going to implement Office 365 for the confidential personal data. And to accomplish discovery and classification, they're going to use AIP Scanner, which is a subset of AIP, to crawl through all the terabytes of on-premises data, figure out what they have, and also apply the classification labels at that point. So legal and business and IT came up with these requirements for GDPR. To cover the financial data, they know that their financial data contains credit cards. That's how they're going to identify it, if it's not identified already. This will remain on premises to support legacy applications. And they have an absolute requirement that if this is ever shared externally, there's sometimes legitimate business reasons to do so, it must be encrypted. Similarly, for the personal data, they already know that the personal data they have that's in the unstructured subset contains Contoso customer numbers. They're going to zero in on that. Going to migrate this stuff to Office 365 to take advantage of the protection capabilities there. And specifically, Office 365 is going to help them with subject access and content search. These are two things they can't do today on premises, and it'll be expensive for them to build. And this, again, they're going to encrypt when sharing externally. So there's many valid reasons someone may need to share confidential personal data externally, but they need to maintain control of that so it doesn't leak beyond the intended recipient. So the solutions they picked, it's Azure Information Protection for the data classification and labels, Office 365 for subject access and content search, data loss prevention, and Office Message Encryption. And Office Message Encryption is a technology that will allow them to encrypt the data as it's sent externally. They also chose Microsoft Cloud App Security to provide additional data loss prevention when these files are shared outside of email. So for example, if an employee moves protected content, the financial data or personal data into Box or Google Drive or something like that, Cloud App Security will help make sure that that is identified and prevent inappropriate sharing to those platforms. So a little bit about Contoso's schema and taxonomy. This is what they came up with. To identify the personal data, they have their Contoso customer numbers well understood and well defined. They can easily identify that content with a regular expression pattern that AIP can use. And for the financial data, we're going to use a built-in sensitive item type for credit card numbers. We're very good at this. We can detect not only a 16-digit number, but our technology will apply the LOOMS algorithm to detect if that's actually a credit card number and use proximity keywords such as Amex, Discover, things like that to identify that. So not a whole lot of work required to identify credit card numbers. Going to use the built-in sensitive item types. So, Contoso has terabytes of on-premises data. We'll talk a little bit about how they're going to discover that and figure out what they have and apply the labels. So they have terabytes of data repositories on premises. They're first going to configure Azure Information Protection. This is where they're going to define their sensitive data types, define the policies. They're going to use the regular expression we showed in their schema and taxonomy to allow Azure Information Protection to detect those Contoso customer numbers. They'll also configure a policy in AIP for the financial data using the built-in sensitive item type of credit card numbers. On a scanner machine, they'll install the client, which includes a scanner. The scanner will reason across all the data repositories on premises. It will produce an inventory report that they can check for accuracy before they actually make changes to these files. When they're satisfied with that, all of the files containing financial data or Contoso customer numbers will be labeled with finance or personal data tag. These labels are the glue that allow the protection policies in Office 365 in our other products, as well as third-party products, identify content that's sensitive or financial data in this case. In addition, as users are now interacting with this data, the Office apps on their PC and their mobile devices will also use AIP so that as new content is created, they don't need to scan it again. As new content is created, if it contains the credit card sensitive item type, it will be labeled as financial. If it contains a Contoso customer number, it'll be labeled at creation as personal data. So Contoso has a requirement to manage how the personal data is used and accessed. They want to stay in control and they want to be responsive to the subject access request. Because they're choosing to move to Office 365, their story is fairly simple. They're just going to use the in-place capabilities inside of Office 365. If you have Office 365, you'll see we now have a GDPR toolbox. This is where we'll light up the ability to respond to subject access request, or data subject request as it's named here. This is turned on in preview for some customers, and if yours is turned off, you'll have it soon. General availability is imminent. This is also where the customer can set up additional policies as required. So to protect the personal data and the financial data, they need to establish some security controls. They want to be responsive to vulnerabilities and prevent and detect data breaches. So what Contoso is going to start with for GDPR is they're going to configure protection policies to consume those AIP labels. There's lots of options in Office 365, but their requirement is to use the existing AIP labels. I wanted to make a point that what you see on the screen is the key that they're going to key off of in their policy. Coming soon to Office 365 is automatic integration and unification with Azure Information Protection. It's not there today, but it's actively being worked on so that the policies are easier to create. My point of demonstrating this is that I want to make sure customers and partners know you don't have to wait. We can configure these policies correctly today. We don't have to wait for the new stuff to come out all the time. Then we're going to use Office 365 data loss prevention to ensure that stuff sent externally is encrypted. And I want to point out that labels are the glue that's going to tie these protection policies to the content so that they don't have to scan the content or configure some kind of parallel protections in Office 365 that they would need to do on premises. And lastly, they're going to pick Office message encryption to handle the encryption component of the content that's shared externally. I won't deep dive into OME right here. If you want to know more about these features, we're talking about it in the booths right behind us. But in a nutshell, what Office message encryption does is allows us to create a policy that's anything that is sent via email outside the organization is encrypted. And it doesn't matter, the user doesn't have to be a user of my tenant, it can be anybody. If it's a federated email platform like Yahoo or Gmail or something like that, it just works. The recipient of that email is the only one allowed to open it. If it's some other email platform that we're not federated with, then the intended recipient will receive a one-time password, which allows them to access that protected content to ensure that they don't forward it, print it, or do something inappropriate with it. And this allows Contoso to share externally with their partners and still maintain control of the personal data. If they wanted to, there's lots of other options they could choose. They could choose to block it, etc. In their case, they're going to use Office message encryption. I just wanted to kind of show a slide of what Office label looks like is a common question. So what they're keying off of is this right here. And that GUID, that MSIP label underscore GUID, is the sort of, we're looking inside the file that's been labeled with AIP. All right, so how this works when we have a user who is going to pick up a protected file on premises with personal data. The user tries to email this externally. Office 365 will recognize that this is an AIP labeled document. This is personal data. So Office 365 DLP will stop the processing of that file, apply encryption to it before it leaves the environment. So if you're interested in the pieces I've talked about today, we've got some download links for you. So the Data Discovery Toolkit, as well as the Detailed Assessment Toolkit, are at aka.ms/GDPR partners. You do not have to be a partner to access this content. It's available to everybody. In addition, we put together Office 365 information protection document for GDPR as well. You can download it at that link. So folks, I wanted to keep this short to keep it open for questions. So if anyone has questions on how this works or how other things work related to GDPR, I'll have a few minutes to talk to you about it.